Poor nurse cares for millionaire patient in a coma. One night he opens his eyes and she reveals a secret that makes the hospital machines go crazy. Hello and welcome to 80s Love Stories, where I, your favorite narrator, Christopher, bring you an exciting love story straight from the unforgettable 1980s. Get ready for a journey full of nostalgia and incredible twists. Today's story is truly remarkable, with an ending that's sure to touch your heart and leave you amazed. So, stay with me until the very last moment. I hope this experience is unforgettable for you, and may God bless you and your family. Now, let's get started. In the fluorescent-lit corridors of St. Mary's Hospital in Boston, 1984, Sarah Mitchell pulled another double shift. Her worn nursing shoes squeaked against the freshly waxed floor as she made her final rounds. The night shift was always the hardest, when the silence pressed in from all sides, broken only by the steady beeping of monitors and the occasional squeak of gurney wheels. At 32, Sarah's life had become a series of long shifts, instant coffee, and quiet conversations with patients who couldn't respond. Her dark circles were hidden beneath a brave smile, her copper-colored hair always neatly tucked away under her cap, despite the exhaustion that seemed to seep into her bones. Tonight, like every night for the past 3 months, she found herself drawn to room 407. Inside lay Thomas Crawford, one of Boston's most successful real estate developers, now reduced to a still form surrounded by machines that tracked his every vital sign. The stark white walls and antiseptic smell couldn't mask the lingering scent of his expensive cologne, Aramis, she'd noticed, still clinging to his personal belongings. "Good evening, Mr. Crawford," Sarah spoke softly as she checked his vitals. It had become her ritual, speaking to him as if he could hear every word. "The Red Sox lost again today. You'd probably have something to say about that." She adjusted his pillows with practiced care, her movements gentle and precise. Thomas Crawford had been admitted after a severe car accident that left him in a coma. What struck Sarah most wasn't his wealth or status, but the complete absence of visitors. No family rushed to his bedside. No friends came bearing flowers or well wishes. His emergency contacts were all business associates who sent their assistants to handle paperwork. "Must be lonely at the top," she murmured, checking his IV drip. The moonlight streaming through the window cast shadows across his distinguished features. Even unconscious, there was something commanding about him. The strong jaw, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. Sarah's own loneliness echoed in the quiet room. Her life had become a series of temporary homes since her parents' passing 5 years ago. The latest was a tiny apartment she could barely afford, and even that was slipping away. Yesterday's eviction notice felt heavy in her uniform pocket. She sank into the chair beside his bed, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability in the safety of his silence. "You know, Mr. Crawford, I got another notice today. 3rd one this month." She laughed softly, but it held no humor. "I should be looking for a second job, but instead, I'm here, talking to you. Isn't that something?" The monitors beeped steadily in response. Sarah leaned back, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. The night shift had become her refuge. No one questioned why she stayed so late, took extra shifts, or sometimes used the staff shower in the early morning hours. "The funny thing is," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't mind it so much anymore. Being here, I mean, it's peaceful in its own way. And you're good company, even if you don't say much." She stood, straightening her uniform. "I should go check on Mrs. Peterson in 412. She's been having trouble sleeping." But something made her pause. Maybe it was the way the moonlight fell across his face, or perhaps just the culmination of too many lonely nights. But Sarah found herself confessing what she'd never dared voice before. "Sometimes I wonder if you can hear me, Mr. Crawford, if you know there's someone here who cares whether you wake up or not." Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted his blanket. "I know it's silly. I'm just your nurse, and well, you probably have a whole world waiting for you out there. But in here, in these quiet hours, I feel less alone, and I hope, somehow, you do too." The steady rhythm of the heart monitor continued unchanged, but for a moment, Sarah could have sworn she saw his fingers twitch. She shook her head, attributing it to exhaustion and too many consecutive night shifts. As she turned to leave, the fluorescent lights flickered briefly, casting strange shadows on the wall. It was just another quiet night at St. Mary's, but something felt different. Something was changing, as subtle as a shift in the wind, as quiet as a sleeping man's breath. Sarah paused at the doorway, looking back one last time. "Good night, Mr. Crawford. I'll see you tomorrow night." She didn't know then how prophetic those words would be, or how the next night would change everything. The following evening brought a torrential September rain to Boston, the kind that drummed against St. Mary's Hospital windows with relentless fury. Sarah arrived for her shift soaked despite her umbrella, her nurse's shoes leaving wet prints on the linoleum floor. Her day had started with another crisis. The final eviction notice taped to her apartment door, giving her 72 hours to vacate. "Evening, Sarah," called Nancy, the day shift charge nurse, her grey hair perfectly coiffed despite the humidity. "Rough day?" Sarah managed a weak smile, wringing water from her copper hair. "Nothing I can't handle." She didn't mention the eviction notice crumpled in her bag, or that she'd spent her lunch break calling every affordable apartment in the area, only to find nothing within her means. The locker room was empty, as Sarah changed into her dry uniform. She carefully hung her wet clothes over the radiator, knowing she'd need them again tomorrow. Her wallet contained exactly $23.48, all that remained until next payday, still a week away. As she began her rounds, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the small storage unit where most of her possessions now lived. After her parents' death in the car accident, she'd sold their house to pay off medical bills and funeral expenses. What remained of their life together fit into a 10x10 space that cost half her monthly salary. Room 407 beckoned like a sanctuary. Thomas Crawford lay exactly as she'd left him that morning. She'd picked up an extra day shift to cover for a sick colleague. The steady beep of his heart monitor had become more familiar to her than her own heartbeat. "Evening, Mr. Crawford," she said, falling into their familiar routine. "The rain's absolutely terrible today. Reminds me of that summer storm in '78 when Dad had to rescue our cat from the neighbor's oak tree." She checked his vitals while speaking, her movements practiced and gentle. He was terrified of heights, but up he went anyway. That was Dad, always putting everyone else first. Sarah adjusted the blinds, blocking out the worst of the lightning flashes. "I try to be like him, you know. He was the best nurse this hospital ever had. 27 years in the ER. Mom used to say he had healing hands." She smiled at the memory. "I guess that's why I followed in his footsteps, though I don't think he ever imagined his daughter would end up living out of a hospital locker room." The confession slipped out before she could stop it. Sarah froze, glancing at the door to make sure no one had overheard. The last thing she needed was for administration to discover she'd been using the staff facilities after hours. "I shouldn't complain," she continued, straightening his blankets. "At least I have a job and quiet company." She touched his hand briefly, an unprofessional gesture she allowed herself only during these night shifts. His skin was warm, alive, despite his stillness. The hours crept by as Sarah made her rounds, always returning to room 407. Around midnight, she brought in a cup of coffee and her dinner, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple from the cafeteria. She'd taken to eating her meals here, talking to him about everything and nothing. "You know what's funny," she said, perched in her usual chair. "I probably know more about you than most people do. I've read your chart so many times I have it memorized. Thomas James Crawford, born April 15, 1944. No allergies, no prior hospitalizations, blood type O negative." She took a sip of her coffee. "But those are just facts. The real you, that's still a mystery." Lightning flashed outside, followed by a boom of thunder that rattled the windows. Sarah jumped, nearly spilling her coffee. "Sorry about that," she laughed nervously. "I've never liked storms. When I was little, Mom would—" She trailed off, noticing something different. Thomas's right hand, usually relaxed, had tensed slightly. Sarah leaned forward, professional instincts taking over. "Mr. Crawford, can you hear me?" She checked his vital signs, slightly elevated but within normal ranges. As she watched, his fingers twitched again, more definitively this time. "Mr. Crawford, if you can hear me, try to move your fingers again." Her heart pounded as she waited. Nothing happened. Just as she began to think she'd imagined it, his entire hand moved, fingers curling inward, before relaxing. Sarah pressed the call button, her hands shaking. "I need assistance in 407, she announced, trying to keep her voice steady. Patient showing signs of consciousness. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as Dr. Matthews and 2 other nurses rushed in. Sarah stood back, watching as they performed their assessments. Her throat felt tight with emotion, hope, fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Good catch, Sarah," Dr. Matthews said finally. "These are definitely positive signs. Keep monitoring him closely. The next 24 hours could be crucial." After they left, Sarah returned to her chair, all thoughts of dinner forgotten. "I knew you were in there somewhere," she whispered. "I knew you could hear me." She took his hand, professional boundaries momentarily forgotten. "I'm here, Mr. Crawford. I'm not going anywhere." The storm continued to rage outside, but Sarah barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on Thomas's face, watching for any sign of movement. As the hours passed, she began to talk again, her voice soft but urgent. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her heart racing. "Something I haven't told anyone else. These past few months of talking to you, being here, it's meant more to me than I can explain. I know it's wrong. You're my patient, and I'm just your nurse. But somehow, in all these quiet nights, She swallowed hard. "I think I've fallen in love with you." The moment the words left her mouth, the monitors began to beep erratically. Thomas's hand tightened around hers, and his eyes, those eyes she'd wondered about for months, suddenly opened. The next few moments seemed to move in slow motion. Thomas Crawford's eyes, a startling shade of grey-blue, darted around the room in confusion before settling on Sarah. His grip on her hand tightened, and she could feel the tremors running through his fingers. The monitors continued their frantic beeping as his heart rate elevated. "Try to stay calm, Mr. Crawford," Sarah said, slipping back into her professional role despite her racing heart. "You're at St. Mary's Hospital. You've been in a coma for 3 months. She reached for the call button with her free hand, but his grip tightened, stopping her. He tried to speak, but only managed a dry rasp. Sarah quickly grabbed the water cup with its bent straw from the bedside table. "Small sips," she instructed, helping him lift his head slightly. After a few moments, he cleared his throat. "How—" His voice was rough from disuse, barely above a whisper. "How long have you been here?" Sarah felt her face flush, remembering her impulsive confession moments ago. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I've been your night nurse since you were admitted." She tried to withdraw her hand, but he held on. "I know," he said, his voice growing slightly stronger. "I heard you. Every night." The implications of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She felt the color drain from her face as she realized what that meant. He had heard everything, every story, every confession, every private moment she had shared, thinking he couldn't hear her. "Mr. Crawford, she began, but he cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "Thomas," he corrected, wincing at the effort of speaking. "After everything, Thomas." Before Sarah could respond, the door burst open as Dr. Matthews and a team of nurses rushed in, alerted by the irregular monitor readings. Sarah quickly stepped back, pulling her hand free as the medical team surrounded Thomas's bed. "Mr. Crawford, welcome back, Doctor," Matthews said, beginning his examination. "Can you follow my finger with your eyes?" Sarah backed away toward the door, her mind spinning. She needed air, needed to think. As she turned to leave, she heard Thomas's voice, stronger now, cutting through the medical chaos. "Sarah?" She paused but didn't turn around. "Yes, Mr. Crawford. Will you be here tomorrow night?" She closed her eyes, fighting back tears she couldn't explain. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll be here." The next 12 hours passed in a blur. Sarah completed her shift in a daze, avoiding room 407 as the medical team ran their tests. By morning, the news of Thomas Crawford's miraculous awakening had spread throughout the hospital. Administrators in expensive suits hurried through the halls, and suddenly the room that had been so peaceful was filled with activity. When Sarah arrived for her next shift that evening, she found the hospital's atmosphere completely transformed. Reporters lingered outside, hoping for updates on the prominent businessman's condition. The hallway leading to room 407 was no longer quiet. Lawyers and business associates filled the space, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Nancy caught her arm as she emerged from the locker room. "Sarah, dear, you've been reassigned to the 3rd floor tonight. They've brought in a private nurse for Mr. Crawford." Sarah felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. "Oh," she managed. "Of course, that makes sense." "The family requested it," Nancy added, though they both knew Thomas had no family. It was the polite way of saying his business associates had taken control. Sarah went through her new assignments mechanically, but her thoughts kept drifting to room 407. Around midnight, she found herself standing outside his door, staring at the unfamiliar name on the duty chart. Eleanor Blackwood, RN. "You must be Sarah," a voice said behind her. She turned to find a tall woman in an impeccably pressed uniform. "I'm Eleanor. Mr. Crawford's been asking for you." Sarah's heart skipped. "He has?" Eleanor nodded, her expression professional but kind. "He's quite insistent. Would you like to see him? He's still awake." Sarah hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "I should check on my other patients." "Sarah." Thomas's voice came from inside the room, stronger than it had been the night before. "Is that you?" Eleanor gave her a gentle push toward the door. "Go on, I'll cover your patients for a few minutes." Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped into the room. It had been transformed in the past 24 hours. Expensive floral arrangements covered every surface, and state-of-the-art medical equipment had replaced the standard hospital issue. Thomas was sitting up slightly, supported by pillows that definitely hadn't come from hospital supply. "You came," he said, and despite everything else that had changed, his eyes were the same as they'd been last night, warm and focused entirely on her. "I said I would," she replied softly, maintaining a professional distance from the bed. "Sarah," he began, then glanced at the 2 men in suits standing by the window. "Would you gentlemen mind giving us a moment?" The men exchanged looks, but filed out silently. As the door closed behind them, Thomas relaxed visibly. "They mean well," he said, "but they're suffocating me. Everyone wants to talk about the company, about decisions that need to be made." He paused, studying her face. "Nobody wants to talk about the Red Sox." The reference to her many one-sided conversations about baseball made Sarah's chest tight. "Mr. Crawford, Thomas," he corrected again, "please, and before you say anything else, I need you to know something." He shifted, wincing slightly at the movement. "Those months in the darkness, your voice was my anchor, your stories, your kindness. They kept me here when it would have been easier to drift away." Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I was just doing my job." "No," he said firmly. "What you did went far beyond duty. You gave me something I haven't had in a very long time. Genuine care without agenda." He hesitated, then added softly, "And what you said last night." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest at the mention of her confession. "Mr. Crawford, Thomas, I apologize for that. It was unprofessional and inappropriate. I understand if you want to file a complaint." "A complaint?" Thomas's grey-blue eyes widened slightly. "Sarah, I've spent the last 3 months listening to you, getting to know you through your stories, your kindness, your unwavering dedication. Even in my darkness, I felt your presence. Your voice became my light." He reached for her hand, and Sarah found herself stepping closer despite her professional instincts screaming at her to maintain distance. His touch was warm, steady, so different from the limp hand she'd held during his coma. "But you don't know me," she protested weakly. "Not really." "Don't I?" His voice was gentle. "I know you lost your parents 5 years ago. I know you became a nurse because of your father. I know you love baseball but can't afford to go to games. I know you put everyone else's needs before your own, even when you're struggling." He paused, his expression growing serious. "I know you're being evicted." Sarah pulled her hand away, wrapping her arms around herself. "You weren't supposed to hear all that." "But I did. And I'm glad." Thomas shifted in his bed, grimacing slightly at the movement. "Sarah, I've spent my life surrounded by people who want something from me. My money, my influence, my connections. But you talked to me when I had nothing to offer. You cared for me when I couldn't respond. You loved me when I was nothing but a silent burden." "You were never a burden," Sarah whispered. A knock at the door interrupted them. Eleanor poked her head in. "I'm sorry, Mr. Crawford, but the specialists are here for your evening evaluation." Thomas's jaw tightened in frustration. "Can it wait?" "I should go," Sarah said quickly, retreating toward the door. "My patience." "Sarah, wait." Thomas's voice stopped her. "Promise you'll come back tomorrow?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Good night, Mr. Crawford." The next few days fell into a strange pattern. Sarah continued her regular duties on the third floor, but each night she would find some excuse to pass by room 407. Sometimes Thomas would be sleeping, other times surrounded by doctors or business associates, but whenever he was alone and awake, he would call her in. Their conversations were different now. Thomas asked questions, wanted to know more about her life, her dreams, her struggles. He told her about his own past, growing up poor in South Boston, building his real estate empire from nothing, the loneliness of success. One night, about a week after he awoke, Sarah arrived to find his room empty, except for Eleanor. "Where is he?" Sarah asked, trying to hide her panic. Eleanor smiled. "Physical therapy. He's doing remarkably well. Dr. Matthews says he might be able to go home in a few weeks." Home. The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. Of course he would go home, back to his mansion, his business, his real life. What had she been thinking? Later that night, as she was changing linens in room 412, a familiar voice called out, "Avoiding me." She turned to find Thomas in a wheelchair in the doorway, Eleanor standing discreetly behind him. "I'll be right outside," Eleanor said, stepping away. "You should be resting," Sarah scolded, but she couldn't help smiling. "I've been resting for 3 months." His eyes twinkled. "Besides, I needed to talk to you. I have a proposition." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Mr. Crawford." "Thomas," he corrected automatically. "And before you say anything, hear me out. I need a private nurse when I leave the hospital. Someone who knows my case, someone I trust." He paused. "Someone who makes me want to get better." Sarah stared at him, speechless. "Are you offering me a job?" "Yes, better hours, significantly better pay." He held up a hand as she started to protest. "This isn't charity, Sarah. This is me being selfish. I want you in my life, and right now, this is the only way I can think of to make that happen properly." "It wouldn't be proper at all," she argued. "The hospital board has already approved it. Technically, you'd be employed by my company's medical team, not me directly." He smiled. "I've thought this through." Sarah sank into the vacant chair beside Mrs. Peterson's empty bed. "I don't know." "Just think about it," Thomas said softly. "That's all I'm asking." Before she could respond, Eleanor reappeared. "Time for your medication, Mr. Crawford." As they left, Thomas glanced back at Sarah. "By the way, how long do you have before you have to leave your apartment?" Sarah felt her face flush. "Tomorrow morning." He nodded thoughtfully. "Think about my offer soon." That night, as Sarah prepared to sleep on the break room couch, she'd already given up her apartment. She couldn't stop thinking about Thomas's proposition. It would solve her immediate problems, but at what cost? Her professional integrity, her heart. The next morning, she arrived early for her shift to find an envelope in her locker. Inside was a key and an address in Back Bay, along with a note in Thomas's surprisingly elegant handwriting. "The apartment belongs to my company. It's used for visiting executives, but it's empty for the next 3 months. Consider it part of your employment package. If you accept, if not, consider it a thank you for all those nights you kept me company in the darkness. Either way, it's yours. T." Sarah held the key, tears blurring her vision. The choice before her seemed impossible. Maintain her professional distance and integrity, or accept help from the man who had somehow become the most important person in her life. Sarah stood outside the Back Bay address, her few possessions in a worn duffel bag at her feet. The morning sun cast long shadows across the elegant brownstone's facade, Her hand trembled as she inserted the key into the lock, half expecting it not to work, for this all to be some elaborate dream. The door opened smoothly. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. When Sarah stepped inside, she had to catch her breath. Hardwood floors gleamed in the morning light streaming through tall windows. The furnishings were elegant but comfortable, nothing like the stark corporate housing she'd expected. It felt like a home. On the kitchen counter, she found another note. "The fridge is stocked. Make yourself comfortable. My private number is below if you need anything." Sarah sank onto a plush sofa, overwhelmed. Her entire apartment could have fit in this living room. The view of the Charles River through the windows was something she'd only seen in magazines. Her uniform shift wasn't for hours, but she couldn't stay here. Not until she'd made her decision. She needed to see Thomas. At the hospital, she found him sitting up in bed, reviewing documents with 2 men in expensive suits. When he saw her in the doorway, his face lit up. "Gentlemen, we'll continue this later," he said, not taking his eyes off Sarah. After they left, Sarah closed the door behind them. The apartment, it's too much. "It was sitting empty," Thomas said simply. "Like I said, it's yours regardless of your decision about the job." "I can't accept either." She twisted her hands together. "You don't owe me anything." "Sarah." His voice was gentle but firm. "I come here." She approached his bed cautiously. He looked stronger every day, the color returning to his face, his movements more sure. "Do you know what I thought about in the darkness?" he asked. "I thought about all the mistakes I've made, the choices that left me lying in a hospital bed with no one but a kind nurse to talk to me." He reached for her hand. "I thought about how I'd built an empire but forgotten to build a life." "Thomas, let me finish. When I heard your voice that first night, telling me about your father, about his healing hands, it touched something in me I thought was long dead." His fingers tightened around hers. "Each night, I waited for your voice. Your stories became my lifeline. Your kindness, your strength, your integrity. Even when you were struggling, you never let it affect your care for others." Sarah felt tears threatening. "I was just doing my job." "No, you were showing me what I'd been missing my entire life. Real connection, genuine care." He paused. "Love." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. "I can't be your nurse anymore," Sarah whispered. "I know." Thomas's eyes held hers. "That's not what I'm asking for." "Then what are you asking for?" "Time, a chance, the opportunity to know you beyond these hospital walls." He gestured at the documents he'd been reviewing. "I spend my days rebuilding my company, making decisions worth millions of dollars. But none of it matters compared to this moment, right here." Sarah pulled her hand away, pacing the room. "You're still my patient. There are rules, ethics. Then I'll request a transfer to another floor, to another hospital if necessary." His voice was determined. "Sarah, I've spent my life playing by rules, making them, breaking them, bending them to my will. But this isn't about rules. This is about what's real." She stopped pacing, looking at him, in his hospital gown, with his hair mussed and 3 days' worth of silver stubble on his jaw. He looked nothing like the powerful businessman the newspapers depicted. He looked like a man, just a man asking for a chance. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of losing myself, of becoming just another acquisition in your empire." Thomas's face softened. "You could never be that. You're the one who saved me, remember? Not just my life, my soul." A knock at the door interrupted them. Eleanor entered with Thomas's evening medication. "Think about it," Thomas said as Sarah moved toward the door. "Take all the time you need. The apartment is yours either way." That night, Sarah returned to the Back Bay apartment. She stood at the windows, watching the city lights reflect off the river. Her whole life had fit into one duffel bag. How could she possibly fit into Thomas Crawford's world? Her reflection in the window looked tired, uncertain. But something else was there too, a spark of hope she hadn't seen in years. The phone on the kitchen counter, new, sleek, obviously expensive, rang, startling her. Only one person had this number. "Hello?" she answered softly. "I meant what I said." Thomas's voice came through clearly. All of it. Sarah closed her eyes, clutching the phone. I know. Have dinner with me. When I'm released. No strings, no expectations. Just dinner. She thought about all the nights she'd spent talking to him in the darkness. All the pieces of herself she'd shared, never expecting him to hear. Never expecting him to understand. Never expecting him to care. Yes, she whispered. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of changes. Sarah transferred to the cardiology unit on the 5th floor, putting physical and professional distance between herself and Thomas. She kept her night shifts, but found herself missing the quiet conversations in room 407. Thomas continued his remarkable recovery. The papers called it miraculous, the business titan who defied death and returned stronger than ever. His photo appeared in the Boston Globe, standing beside his hospital bed in an expensive suit, announcing his return to the helm of Crawford Development. Sarah watched it all from a distance, adjusting to her new reality. The Back Bay apartment became her sanctuary, though she still felt like a visitor in its elegant rooms. Each night, exactly at midnight, the phone would ring. "Tell me about your day," Thomas would say, and for a few precious minutes it felt like those nights in room 407. Finally, the day of his discharge arrived. Sarah watched from the 5th floor as television crews gathered outside the hospital's main entrance. Thomas emerged in a perfectly tailored suit, walking steadily with just a hint of a cane, surrounded by an entourage of doctors and business associates. That evening, her phone rang earlier than usual. "Look out your window," Thomas said when she answered. Sarah moved to the large bay window below. A classic 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air in powder blue idled at the curb. Even from 3 stories up, she could see Thomas standing beside it, phone to his ear, looking up at her window. "You're supposed to be resting," she scolded, but couldn't help smiling. "I've rested enough. Come down. Let me take you to dinner." The restaurant was small, tucked away on a quiet street in the North End. No cameras, no business associates, just candlelight and the smell of garlic and marinara sauce. Thomas had changed from his business suit into a more casual outfit that somehow made him look younger, more approachable. "I used to come here when I was starting out," he told her as they were seated in a cozy corner booth. "She's best pastor in Boston, and they didn't mind if I sat for hours nursing 1 glass of wine while I worked on project proposals." Sarah looked around at the red-checkered tablecloths and vintage Italian posters. "It's not what I expected." "What did you expect? The Ritz-Carlton, crystal chandeliers?" His eyes twinkled. "I thought you knew me better than that." "Do I?" Sarah asked softly. "Know you, I mean." "Really?" Thomas reached across the table, taking her hand. "Better than anyone ever has. Those nights in the hospital. You saw me at my most vulnerable. You knew me when I had nothing to offer but silence. And now? Now I have everything to offer, but all I want is to be the man you talked to in the darkness." He squeezed her hand gently. "The man who fell in love with your voice, your stories, your heart." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thomas, let me finish. I've spent my life building things, buildings, companies, fortunes, but lying in that hospital bed, listening to you night after night, I realized I'd never built anything that really mattered." He paused, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I want to build something real, Sarah, something true, with you." The waiter appeared with wine, giving Sarah a moment to collect herself. When they were alone again, she took a deep breath. "I'm still a nurse," she said. "That's who I am, what I do. I can't be a society wife and hosting charity galas and sitting on boards." "I would never ask you to be anything but exactly who you are," Thomas leaned forward. "The woman who pulled me back from the darkness, the woman who showed me what real strength looks like, the woman who loved me before she knew I could hear her." Sarah felt tears threatening. "What about your world, your business associates, your social circle?" "They work for me, not the other way around." His voice was firm. "Besides, most of them wouldn't be there if I hadn't woken up. You were." The evening passed too quickly. They talked about everything and nothing. His plans for the company's future, her dreams of opening a small clinic someday, their shared love of classic cars and baseball. It felt both familiar and thrillingly new. After dinner, Thomas drove her home in the Bel Air, taking the long way along the river. When they reached her building, he walked her to her door. "Sarah," he said softly, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne. Still Aramis, she noticed with a smile. "I know this isn't conventional. I know there are 1,000 reasons why it shouldn't work, but in that hospital room, you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. Let me give you the same." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning, full of promise. When they parted, Sarah felt dizzy, and not just from the kiss. "Good night, Sarah," he whispered, turning to leave. "Thomas," she called after him. He turned back. "Thank you, for dinner, for everything." His smile was warm. "Thank you for saving my life, in every way that matters." As she watched him drive away, Sarah touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. For the first time in years, she felt truly, completely alive. 6 months passed like a dream. Sarah continued her nursing at St. Mary's, refusing Thomas's repeated offers to help her find a better position. She loved her work, and he loved that about her. Their worlds merged slowly, carefully, like watercolors bleeding together to create something entirely new. The papers eventually caught wind of their relationship. "Crawford's Angel of Mercy," screamed one headline, accompanied by a grainy photo of them leaving the small Italian restaurant that had become their regular spot. Sarah had been mortified, but Thomas just laughed. "So they're just angry they didn't get the scoop when I was in the hospital," he told her over midnight phone calls that had become their ritual, even on nights they'd spent together. The Back Bay apartment slowly transformed from a temporary shelter to a true home. Sarah added small touches, family photos, her mother's old quilt, the baseball signed by Karl Jastrzemski that Thomas had somehow tracked down from her childhood stories. One crisp October evening, exactly 1 year after Thomas first opened his eyes in room 407, he asked Sarah to take a walk with him along the Charles River. The autumn air was sharp with the promise of winter, and fallen leaves crunched beneath their feet. "Do you know what I remember most about being in the coma?" he asked as they stopped to watch the sunset paint the water gold. Sarah shook her head. She rarely asked about that time, afraid of stirring painful memories. "Our colors," he said softly. "Even in the darkness, when you would talk to me, I would see colors. Your voice was warm copper, like your hair. Your laugh was silver bells. Your tears, the few times you cried, were deep blue." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "But the moment you told me you loved me, that was pure gold. It filled everything, pushed away all the darkness. So it gave me something to fight for, something to come back to." Sarah felt tears rising. "Thomas." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn book. She recognized it immediately, her father's old nursing manual, the one she'd told Thomas about during those long nights, the one that had been lost when she had to sell her parents' house. "How did you—" "It took some time," he admitted. "A lot of used bookstores, a lot of searching. But I found it." He handed her the book, its familiar leather cover soft with age. "Open it." With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the manual. Inside, nestled in a carefully cut hollow, was a ring. Simple, elegant, vintage, exactly what she would have chosen for herself. "Sarah Mitchell," Thomas said quietly, taking the ring from its hiding place. "You saved my life. Not just in the hospital, but every day since. You showed me what real love looks like. Patient, selfless, true. You loved me when I had nothing to give but silence. Now I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much you are loved in return." He lowered himself to one knee, ignoring the curious onlookers who had stopped to watch. "Will you marry me?" Sarah looked at this man, this strong, successful, powerful man who had somehow become her everything, kneeling before her without a trace of self-consciousness. She thought about all the nights she'd spent talking to him in the darkness, sharing pieces of her soul, never knowing if he could hear her. She thought about his first words upon waking, asking if she would be there the next night. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes!" The ring slid perfectly onto her finger. When Thomas stood and pulled her into his arms, she could feel his heart beating strong and steady against her chest. The same heart she had monitored for so many months, now beating in time with her own. Later that night, back in the apartment that had become their favorite place to be together, Sarah curled against Thomas on the sofa, watching the city lights twinkle beyond the windows. "There's something I want to show you," he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. Inside were papers for a small building in South Boston. "It needs work, but I think it would make a perfect neighborhood clinic, the kind your father would have loved." Sarah stared at the papers, unable to speak. "It's yours," Thomas continued. "Whether you want to run it yourself or hire others, it's completely up to you. Consider it an early wedding present." "But your board of directors already approved it as part of our community development initiative." He smiled. "It turns out nearly dying gives you a lot of leverage in corporate decisions." Sarah laughed through her tears, thinking about how far they'd come from those quiet nights in room 407. How a chance assignment, a lonely millionaire, and a nurse with a tender heart had somehow turned into the greatest love story she'd never expected. "I love you," she said, the words that had first woken him from his darkness. "I know," Thomas replied, pulling her closer. "I heard you the first time." Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, but in that moment, in that room, time seemed to stand still. A silent patient and his guardian angel, no longer silent, no longer patient, but forever bound by the words spoken in darkness and the love that had brought them into light. Thank you for watching today's story. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to relive the magic of the 80s every day with our heartfelt stories. May God bless you and your family, and don't forget to click on the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another totally rad story you won't want to miss. See you in the next video, and stay awesome.